The serpent's bite cut through the early dawn like a blade through storm-dark waters. Her captain, Flint Locke, stood at the bow, eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon, lips pressed tight around a bitter sneer. Somewhere out there lurked his old ally turned mortal enemy, Marrow. The two had crossed paths twice in pursuit of this treasure, and each time the stakes had grown. Flint wasn't about to let him get close this time, not while he still had the cursed map in his grip. The map was legend, inscribed by the infamous pirate monarch Diego Sangre himself. It was rumored to have claimed the souls of 3 entire crews since its discovery, each one trying and failing to bring the legendary riches up from the depths of crimson waters. His hand tightened around the brittle parchment, inked in eerie black that seemed to pulse faintly under the breaking light. A captain's soul for the treasure's release, that's what the map said. But whether that was old pirate superstition or the dark truth of Sangre's buried prize, Flint didn't care. He'd come too far to turn back now. The call rang out from the crow's nest, snapping Flint from his musings. "Ship on the starboard, Captain. She flies black and bone. It's Marrow's crew." "Damn that wretch," Flint growled, clenching his fist. He turned to his first mate, a wiry, scarred man named Reeve, whose single eye blazed with a fierce loyalty to his captain. Reeve nodded, already barking orders to the men. Flint watched as his crew, hardened fighters every one of them, scrambled to the deck, loading cannons, hoisting sails, and bracing for the storm that was about to descend. With a shudder of dark satisfaction, Flint raised his cutlass to the heavens, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Prepare to make them regret ever setting foot in my waters. Today, Crimson Waters will earn its name." As the morning light split over the horizon, Flint could see Marrow's ship, the Bone Reaper, cutting through the waves toward them, each swell bringing her closer. Smoke from the previous battle still clung to her hull, her figurehead of a grinning skull barely visible against the shifting fog. Flint knew Marrow wouldn't hesitate to double-cross him again for the treasure. A dark part of him welcomed it. There was no greater satisfaction than defeating a man who'd already tried to stab you in the back once. Before we set sail, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And if you were part of this crew, what role would you take on? The navigator, the lookout? Let's see who's brave enough to join this adventure. With Flint's crew primed for battle and the Bone Reaper drawing ever nearer, the air crackled with tension. Each pirate knew that what lay ahead wasn't just another skirmish. It was the final push to claim the cursed treasure, a legacy of gold and horror that had haunted sailors for a century. Only, Flint had a secret. The Serpent's bite was faster, a ship designed for hunting, her hull carved to slice through waves like a harpoon through flesh, and he would use every advantage he had to finally bury Marrow once and for all. The Bone Reaper loomed closer, her cannons ready, her sails stretched like the wings of a hawk descending on its prey. The Bone Reaper's figurehead leered through the morning mist as Captain Flint Locke steeled himself for the battle ahead. Marrow's ship cut through the fog with the grim certainty of death itself, her black sails stretched taut, and her cannons angled with cruel precision. Flint's hand itched toward the hilt of his cutlass, his jaw set in a cold, predatory grin. He could feel the rising anticipation of his crew, their eyes locked on their rivals as the Bone Reaper pulled into range. Flint's first mate, Reeve, sidled up beside him, his lone eye gleaming with a feral eagerness. "They're not pulling any punches, Captain," Reeve observed, his voice roughened from years at sea and smoke. "Marrow's out for blood." "Aye, but he won't taste ours," Flint replied, his voice a low growl. He raised his arm and barked a command, "Fire!" The deck shuddered as the first volley of cannonballs erupted from the Serpent's bite, arcing across the waves with a bone-rattling roar. Explosions tore through the fog as cannonballs smashed into the Bone Reaper's hull, splintering wood and sending crewmen scrambling. The retaliatory shots came almost instantly, and Flint watched as Marrow's cannons thundered back, hurling metal through the air toward his ship. The two ships closed in, broadside to broadside, cannons blazing and filling the air with thick smoke and the tang of gunpowder. Flint moved among his men, shouting orders above the chaos, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of battle. The Bone Reaper was faster than he'd expected, her cannons sharper, but Flint had one advantage he knew Marrow could never match: the loyalty of his crew. men who had sailed with him through storms, curses, and countless battles over the years. They fought with a unity born from shared victories and near-death escapes, and now every man knew what was at stake. As the smoke cleared, the two ships had drawn so close that Flint could see Marrow himself, his old ally turned rival, standing at the helm of the Bone Reaper. Marrow's smile was a twisted thing, gleaming with a promise of violence. Flint knew that smile all too well, and his grip tightened on his cutlass as he stared down his foe. Marrow raised his hand in a mocking salute, shouting across the churning sea, "Come now, Flint. You followed me this far, but do you really have the nerve to see it through? Bring your best, Marrow," Flint roared back. "I'll see you at the bottom of these cursed waters before I let you claim Diego Sangre's treasure." Just then, a flash of movement caught Flint's eye. A dark shape loomed between the ships, half submerged in the churning water. A third vessel, cloaked in ethereal mist. It appeared almost as an apparition, its decayed sails fluttering against the weight of centuries. The Shroud, the legendary ghost ship guarding Diego Sangre's treasure, had surfaced. Its creaking timbers seemed to groan with a voice of their own, and the ancient symbols carved into the hull glowed faintly as if stirred by the presence of the living. The sight sent a wave of fear through both crews. The Shroud's presence meant the treasure was close, but so was the curse. Flint glanced at Reeve, and the two shared a look of grim understanding. They would have to put their feud with Marrow aside, if only for a moment, to survive what was coming. "Send word to Marrow's crew," Flint ordered. "They'll fight with us, or we'll all end up on that blasted ghost ship." Reluctantly, Reeve unfurled a white flag, signaling a parley. Flint waited tensely as Marrow's crew stilled, their cannons silent for the first time. A few tense minutes later, Marrow boarded the Serpent's Bite, his swagger confident, his eyes full of calculation. "So," he sneered, "a truce, is it? I never thought I'd see the day when Flint Locke would need my help." "Don't flatter yourself," Flint snapped. "We both know the Shroud isn't the kind of ship you sail alone. You want Sangre's treasure as much as I do, but you won't live to spend it without me." Marrow's grin was as sharp as a dagger. "Then let's not waste time." He extended his hand and Flint took it. Their eyes locked in a brief, tense truce. The alliance was uneasy, each man aware of the knife's edge they balanced upon. But the Shroud left little choice, her crew of cursed souls already watching from the shadows. Together they boarded the Shroud, their crews following close behind, each step on the ancient deck echoing as if they walked through the hollow of an empty grave. The cursed symbols carved into the wood glowed faintly, and the eerie silence was broken only by the creak of old timber and the distant whispers of lost souls. Flint scanned the ship's decaying deck, feeling the weight of 1,000 secrets pressing down on him. Marrow moved beside him, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that Flint recognized all too well. As they made their way into the bowels of the ship, a low, rumbling voice filled the air, sending a chill down Flint's spine. It was as if the ship itself was speaking to them, warning them of the price they'd pay to touch the treasure of Diego Sangre. They pressed on, reaching a chamber deep within the Shroud. There, in a beam of moonlight that filtered through a crack in the hull, lay the legendary chest, bound with thick iron bands and covered in dust as ancient as the sea. But as Flint and Marrow approached, they heard a faint spectral whisper growing louder. The air grew colder, and a spectral figure materialized. A twisted shadow of Diego Sangre himself, bound to the ship and his cursed riches. His eyes were hollow, his voice a rasp that clawed at their minds. "To touch the treasure," he warned, "is to claim the curse." Marrow's eyes gleamed with avarice. Ignoring the warning, he reached for the chest, but Flint held him back. "You don't know what you're meddling with, Marrow. Sangre's treasure has claimed more than riches. It's taken lives, whole ships. Afraid, are you?" Marrow taunted, his hand resting defiantly on the chest's cold metal. "Perhaps this curse is just another story to keep cowards from true power." But the moment Marrow's fingers touched the chest, a cold wind swept through the chamber, and the spectral figure of Diego Sangre laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that made the hairs on the back of Flint's neck stand on end. The ghostly crew of the Shroud emerged, skeletal hands reaching from the shadows, their hollow eyes locked on Marrow and his greedy hand. Flint stepped back, calling to his crew, "Back to the deck. We're done here." Marrow struggled, defiant, but his men pulled him back, fear overcoming their greed. They retreated through the creaking halls as the cursed crew pursued them, their hollow laughter echoing like the cries of lost souls. Reaching the deck, Flint ordered his men back to the Serpent's Bite, watching as Marrow stumbled onto his own ship. The brief truce was over. Flint turned his ship away from the Shroud, watching as the ghost ship drifted silent and deadly between them and the treasure they dared to disturb. But Marrow wasn't done. With a final greedy glance back at the Shroud, he barked orders to his men to turn the Bone Reaper back, his hunger for riches clouding the danger that hung thick in the air. "Let him have it," Flint muttered, feeling the first pangs of unease. The Shroud would have its price, and he'd not let his crew be the ones to pay it. But even as he turned away, he knew the curse wasn't done with him, or Marrow. The night grew thick with fog as the Serpent's Bite and the Bone Reaper faced off once more, this time with the cursed ship, the Shroud, haunting the waters between them like a silent judge. Flint Locke watched Marrow's ship with a mixture of dread and resolve, knowing the danger was far from over. The ancient ghostly vessel, tethered to Diego Sangre's treasure, seemed almost alive, its spectral crew a grim reminder of the cost of greed. But Marrow, undeterred by his brush with death aboard the Shroud, turned his ship with mad determination. Flint watched him, a sliver of pity touching his hardened heart, knowing that whatever came next, Marrow's lust for Sangre's treasure would bring ruin. Flint's own crew looked uneasy, their eyes fixed on the eerie glow radiating from the Shroud, whose deck was now crowded with shadows. The long-lost souls of Sangre's crew drawn to the living ships like moths to flame. Reeve approached Flint, his one eye wide with fear. "Captain, I say we leave these waters. Sangre's curse isn't worth risking our lives." Flint nodded, but his gaze remained locked on Marrow's ship. The Bone Reaper had closed in on the Shroud, her cannons aimed at the ghostly vessel, and Marrow stood at the helm, shouting commands with a wild gleam in his eyes. Flint shook his head. "Marrow won't leave until he's pried every coin from Sangre's chest, but he doesn't see. He's already a dead man." Suddenly, Marrow's voice echoed across the water. "Flint, I'll not leave these waters empty-handed. You were always a coward, content with scraps while the real treasure slipped through your fingers." Flint's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. He'd seen the curse take hold of men before. He knew better than to let it sink its hooks into his pride. Yet he also knew Marrow wasn't bluffing. The Bone Reaper's cannons roared, blasting into the Shroud's hull with reckless fury. The ghostly ship shuddered, its specters stirring, their hollow eyes fixing on the Bone Reaper's crew as they loosed another volley, tearing at the Shroud as if desperate to break her curse by force. And then it happened. A sound like tearing fabric filled the air as the Shroud's ghostly crew emerged in full, spectral forms, swarming over the Bone Reaper's deck.
Hey there! Quick message. Grab a paper, write down, "You Pirate." Our channel name. Come back soon. We've got incredible stories you won't want to miss.
Flint watched, transfixed, as Marrow's men fought the ghostly crew in vain, their weapons passing uselessly through the phantoms as cold, skeletal hands reached through flesh and bone, draining them of life. The curse had been unleashed in full, and the Shroud's crew claimed their price with merciless efficiency. Marrow's voice, once so confident, was now a panicked scream. "No, I'll have the treasure, I've earned it." But the spirits ignored him, their hollow faces filled with a hunger that no gold could sate. Flint, watching with grim satisfaction, knew it was time to leave. "Reeve, we're pulling back," he ordered. "Set full sail and get us out of these cursed waters." As the Serpent's Bite turned, Marrow's ship, ravaged by the dead, began to sink, the ghostly crew dragging it down to the depths with relentless force. Flint's crew watched in stunned silence, their faces pale as they saw the Bone Reaper engulfed in a glowing mist, her hull splintering, her masts creaking as she was pulled into the dark abyss by invisible hands. But the curse wasn't satisfied with Marrow alone. The Shroud turned her gaze, dark, calculating, toward Flint's retreating ship. As if sensing unfinished business, the cursed vessel's shadowy crew slipped into the water, their forms dissolving and reappearing like mist, closing in on the Serpent's Bite. Flint's heart pounded as he shouted orders. "Faster, men! That ship isn't done with us yet!" A chill swept over the serpent's bite as the fog thickened, tendrils of mist slithering over the deck, where they solidified into ghostly hands grasping at the crew. Flint slashed his cutlass through one, and it dissolved into vapor. But more rose to take its place. Reeve, battling beside him, swung his sword through another ghostly figure, his face drawn with terror. "They're everywhere, Captain." The Shroud's presence grew heavier, and Flint realized they couldn't outrun the curse. Not unless a memory sparked in his mind. The whispered tale he'd heard about Sangre's treasure. The way to break the curse. Only a captain's soul could sever the bond. He turned to Reeve, his expression resolute, his voice steady. "Get the men to safety, I have a plan." "Captain, no. There must be another way," Reeve stammered, horror dawning in his eyes as he realized Flint's intent. "This isn't the time for arguments," Flint growled, his tone final. "You know what needs to be done." Reeve hesitated, his loyalty warring with his fear, but then he nodded, rallying the crew to the escape boats as Flint moved to the bow, alone. He lifted his cutlass high, its blade catching the faint light as he faced the Shroud head-on. "I'm Flint Locke, captain of the Serpent's Bite. I challenge you, Diego Sangre, to honor the curse." The spectral crew paused, as if recognizing his defiance. A figure appeared on the deck of the Shroud, Sangre himself, or what was left of him. His face was a skull, his hollow eyes staring through Flint with a gaze colder than the deepest ocean. He extended a bony hand, inviting Flint to step forward. "Your ship or your soul, Captain," Sangre rasped, his voice echoing through the mist. "One must stay with the treasure." Flint held his ground, heart pounding as he stared down the cursed monarch. "Take my soul, but release my crew." Sangre tilted his head, considering, and then he nodded. With a wave of his hand, the Shroud's crew melted back into the mist, leaving the Serpent's Bite free. Flint watched as his men pulled away in the small boats, Reeve among them, his face stricken as he realized what Flint had sacrificed. Flint felt the chill seep into his bones as the Shroud's pull grew stronger. The last thing he saw was the Bone Reaper sinking into the depths, Marrow's final terrified scream echoing across the waves. The sea swallowed both captains and their ships, Sangre's curse claiming its due. As the mist cleared, the Serpent's Bite, empty and abandoned, floated free, her sails snapping in the wind as she drifted toward the open sea. Flint's crew watched in silence, their faces solemn, knowing their captain had traded his life for their freedom. They were free, but they would never forget the price paid in the crimson waters. The Shroud had claimed its soul, and Flint Locke had become one with the legend he'd once sought to conquer. The morning after the cursed battle dawned bleak and silent, with the crew of the Serpent's Bite adrift and leaderless. They sat huddled in their small boats, watching their ship, now a ghost itself, drifting aimlessly across the crimson-tinted sea, devoid of its captain and forever marked by what they'd witnessed. The Serpent's Bite floated in eerie silence, her once proud sails drooping, her deck empty, yet the shadow of Flint Locke lingered, like a memory woven into her timbers. Reeve, now assuming the reluctant mantle of leadership, felt the weight of Flint's final command pressing on his shoulders. His face was drawn, his one eye staring hard at the haunted ship, unwilling to look away. The crew murmured among themselves, voices low with reverence and fear. "He sacrificed himself for us," one man whispered. Another nodded, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Flint's ghost to appear, calm and resolute as ever, giving orders from the bow. They had all seen it. The moment Flint chose his fate, challenging the cursed specter of Diego Sangre in exchange for his crew's freedom. He had given his life to break the curse, severing the link between Sangre's treasure and the living world. The waters had released them, but the sea had taken its price. A shiver ran through them as they recalled the final moments. The Shroud, fading into the mist, the cursed ship returning to the depths with its spectral captain, Marrow's last terrified scream echoing as he and his treasure sank into the fathomless dark. In those few harrowing minutes, the sea had claimed Flint's body, but his spirit had marked the Serpent's Bite. Reeve cleared his throat, his voice thick as he addressed the crew. "We're free of the curse," he began, casting one last long look at the ship that had been their home. "But we owe our lives to a captain who never backed down, who chose us over the lure of gold." His gaze turned back to the serpent's bite. "It's time we honor him by leaving this cursed stretch of water. Flint Locke would want us to live." With a shared nod, the crew began rowing, but they left slowly, unwilling to fully part from their captain. As they rowed, their eyes stayed locked on the ghostly ship drifting behind them, her hull barely visible through the thickening mist. The legends would live on. Flint Locke's name would be whispered across every port and tavern, and the tale of how he faced the Shroud would haunt every sailor with dreams of treasure and ambition. But as the distance grew, Reeve noticed something strange. The serpent's bite was following them, her empty hull gliding silently through the fog. A few of the men noticed as well, hands tightening on their oars, wary. The haunted ship kept its distance, always within sight, an echo of the crew she had once carried, and the memory of the captain who had given his soul to save them. The day wore on, but the serpent's bite did not disappear. Instead, as dusk fell, she settled in behind them, a quiet guardian, her presence an unspoken promise. Reeve felt a pang of resolve settle in his heart as he realized Flint was watching over them still. The crew would go on, carrying with them the legend and the memory of a man who had lived and died by the code of the sea. Months later, in a bustling port where sailors swapped tales of adventure and cursed treasures, a hush fell over a crowded tavern as Reeve strode inside. Scarred, weary but alive, he carried with him the tale of Flint Locke and the curse of the Shroud. In exchange for a round of ale, he would tell the story of how two pirate captains had sought Sangre's treasure, but only one had survived the haunted crimson waters, and even he had paid the ultimate price. Some claimed they'd seen the serpent's bite still drifting through those cursed seas, led by a ghostly figure with a cutlass in hand and eyes like shadowed steel. Others swore that on stormy nights, Flint Locke's voice could be heard on the wind, calling his crew to stand strong and defy even death itself. The legend grew, and sailors whispered that the serpent's bite would answer the call of any soul daring enough to challenge the Shroud's curse once more. But they spoke with caution, for any sailor who went searching for Flint Locke's ship often disappeared, lost in the depths of the crimson waters, or perhaps joining the captain in his eternal watch over the cursed treasure. The serpent's bite was now a legend, her name carved into the stories of every sailor who dared brave the high seas. And somewhere in the depths of the ocean, Diego Sangre's curse lay waiting, its dark power held back only by the unyielding spirit of a captain who had sacrificed everything. If you've sailed with us through this tale of bravery, curses, and the unbreakable bond of loyalty, then don't forget to subscribe to You Pirate for more haunted adventures and legendary battles. Share the legend of Flint Locke with a friend, and if you dare, tell us below where you would sail if given the chance to face the Shroud and claim Sangre's lost fortune.